raft. We're gonna make that one and those 3 toddlers hang on.
Yeah. They would just whine anyways, right? Now, see, that's really messed up.
I have all my hours, I just don't document them.
We're not doing the Cold War. That's the other
Like,
class.
I do so much community service and I don't document any of it.
Well, you can backtrack it, right?
I sure hope so, because I have literal hundreds of hours. I do at least an hour every week.
All of my community service really just for my kids. In fact, I've done some community service stuff for my kids' school but it's like, I'm like, I don't know.
And mine's mostly my church.
Yeah, I
Like
would say so.
mission trips. That's a lot of community service hours because you're working literally like 12 hours a day.
I'm in a weird situation. Sometimes I'll miss the time for my church, so I'll wind up going to another one every now and again. Because some Catholics, so we're like, I'll just go to another church. Boop, boop, boop. So, but I shouldn't do that. I need to go to my home church more. Hey, all right, folks. So it is March the 31st, last day of the month. Yay, almost Easter, yay. And so we are going to move along with our Age of Jackson lecture, which is posted in the Google Classroom. We're going to finish this up because if you remember, we were talking about what was going on with the Cherokee in Georgia. And so we ended off with the Chota in 1835. And so we are going to also start the next unit today. And so this unit plus the next unit will be on your next test. And I'm really hoping that we can take that test, not next week, but the following week. And then we can move on to our final material, which will be super duper cool because we've got to have our finals the last week of April. So getting close, right? Getting close. So we gotta get close to him. Yeah, that's right. So we gotta make sure we get through this. So no days off, no rest. I will post the notes in the Google Classroom for this after the lecture's over. So don't look for it yet. Not, of course, one was in the chiropractor and the other was at the network. I can't see it. All right, so this is supposed to be a picture of the Trail of Tears, which I'm sure many of you have heard of when you were little. Like I remember, like even when I was a little kid, I heard about the Trail of Tears. Like
The Oregon Trail.
Native Americans crying.
Yeah. Like I remember, like even as a kid, like my family would tell me about stories about this. So, so Trail of Tears. Like the Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Creeks before them, the Cherokee were forced to relocate. And so Oklahoma and other territories near it were put aside as Indian territories. And so they weren't governed as reservations yet, but they were places of forced relocation. In 1836, the Cherokee were given 2 years to move. By 1838, only 2,000 migrated. 16,000 stayed on their land. The government sent 7,000 soldiers who forced them out without a chance to pack their belongings. It's because, so in 1836, they were told, here's your eviction notice, you have 2 years, go. Well, a lot of these folks are like, no, we're going to stay behind and see what kind of legal things we can do to keep our home. They believed that they could work within the system and make it work out. But, and I mean, you know, a lot of Jewish people thought the same thing too when the Nazis were gaining power in Germany. They're like, well, eventually people will come to their senses and we'll get our home back. Eventually people will come to our senses and they'll vote Hitler out of office. Well, these things don't always happen. And that's why a lot of Jews didn't escape Germany. And the same kind of hope that things would get better may have been related here as well. On the march known as the Trail of Tears, 4,000 Cherokee people died of cold, hunger, and disease. So we had that 16,000 that marched off. And then you see a full quarter of them were going to die. The removed Cherokees were initially settled in Indian Territory known as Oklahoma today. And so, very, very sad stories. Forced march where they made stops. Many of them had to march through the winter, and they, of course, didn't bring things to see them through the trip. Soldiers made sure that they stayed within their rows as they moved along. Every now and again, they would come across a military fort for food and stuff like that. They were expected to have brought the things they needed. And the government didn't provide supplies to take care of them very well. So as you see, especially the young and the old fell to the side and died. So very sad thing, very, very sad. This is similar things like this, you could say, happen like to the Armenian people after during World War I, when you had the new country of Turkey rounded up millions of Christians from Armenia because they wanted their territory and marched them south until almost all of them died. And so, pretty sad story there. So yeah, death marches are not good. And this is a black spot on American history. Here is a map of various evictions. So we see Chickasaw Territory, Seminoles. A lot of Seminoles were able to stay within Florida, as I mentioned last time. After years of warfare, were able to keep their home within like the Everglades and stuff.
Yeah, they definitely could keep their home in the Everglades.
Oh yeah. Well, we just couldn't really go in there, you know.
Especially if they know how to live in there.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's calories for those who are willing to take it, yeah. So, but you see also now, some Cherokee did manage to make it to East Texas during the time when Sam Houston was president of the Republic of Texas. But unfortunately for them, whenever Lamar became the second president of Texas, he had them forcibly removed. And so even though Sam Houston was a big friend, and I think he was adopted into the Cherokee Nation, he actually lived with the Cherokee for quite a while. His nickname was Big Drunk. So, well, he was I think he was a U.S. senator or a U.S. congressman, but he got so tired of politics, he went off to go live with the Indians, and left his family and everything, and just went off to be an Indian. So, all right, next one. So that's one of the big deals that has to do with the Andrew Jackson administration. Another one is, and this is like the omens of the Civil War here, right? And so we're going to talk a lot about those omens in the next little units. And so this is called the Nullification Crisis. So you remember like nullus nullum in Latin, it's an adjective for nothing, right? Or nothingness. And so the nullification in law terms has to do with, well, we're going to ignore the law and pretend it doesn't exist. Like jury nullification is like this. Like jury nullification is usually like, yes, we understand that according to the law, the person accused committed murder, but we're going to say they're not guilty because we agree with why they did it. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. For years, Southerners had claimed that tariffs left them at an unfair disadvantage. They especially detested the tariff of abominations. Remember, that was one of those things that was brought in during John Quincy Adams' administration, and it put high tariffs on everything, which raised the price of a lot of things in the country. That's one of the reasons why it became so unpopular. Jackson didn't like these tariffs, but he recognized they were the law of the land, so he enforced them. In South Carolina, the state legislature published a sectionalist paper by John C. Calhoun, which called for nullification. So he's going to be like the godfather of nullification. And his writings on this will become very popular in the South before and during the Civil War. Before this period, He was actually a really big nationalist type guy. He was like the unification of America. Let's do things as a country. But he's going to have a change of heart, become more of a states' rights person, as we see here. In 1832, South Carolina voted to nullify and ignore the Tariff of Abominations. It is a largely agricultural southern state. They don't manufacture much. So they needed to import cheap things for their farmers to buy. So they're like, forget it. We're not going to pay those stinking tariffs. Andrew Jackson, though he didn't like the tariffs, saw this as an affront to federal power and an insult to him personally. So he quickly reinforced federal forts in South Carolina and sent in warships to ensure the tariff was collected. He was threatening war on South Carolina to enforce a law he didn't even like because he believed in the primacy of the presidency and the federal government. And so this is something that's going to be, you're going to see this again in the Civil War. But of course, as you know, the Civil War is going to happen when the presidency is changing. And the president, the guy before Lincoln really just wanted to avoid the whole mess. And so that didn't help. Really kind of need a strong leader in crises like this to make sure things don't fall apart. That's why we have an executive branch, so that whenever there's real danger, one person can take charge instead of like holding each other's hands and fumbling and stuff, right? All right. All right, so the nullification crisis continued. Though intellectuals such as Calhoun and Daniel Webster both opposed nullification. He opposed nullification. Daniel Webster was a big national guy, right? Primacy of the federal government and all that stuff. They would debate over nullification. Jackson demanded to be done with it. Jackson asked Congress to pass a force bill giving him power to invade South Carolina with the military. It was like, look, Constitution says that it is my power to put down insurrections. Like, remember, George Washington had done this personally as well during the Whiskey Rebellion. He wanted to do the same thing. Congress granted him this power. But at the same time, to try to make sure like a war didn't happen, they lowered the tariffs. South Carolina immediately withdrew its nullification of the tariff, but then said it nullified the force bill, which they really couldn't do. So they were like, ha ha ha, we won. We got the tariffs lowered. And Jackson was like, ha ha ha, I won. I scared you. So Jackson chose to ignore the new nullification since he had the tax revenue again. This left questions regarding states' rights dangerously unanswered. So later on, states are going to be like, look, South Carolina showed that we can nullify law and get what we want. Because it's just how it works. Remember, it's going to be a big question. Are the United States made up of the states or of the people? Well, the South is going to start saying it is just the states. So, and states have rights. Of course, the founders would have agreed to a point, obviously. Well, they made the Senate. And the ratification process. Oh yeah, hey, that's the last one for this unit. Let me go ahead and get the next one up. Hooray! I think I'll go ahead and download this one as a PDF and upload it. Yeah, the next one's titled Westword Expansion, From Sea to Shining Sea. It load. I gotta title it as dual credit because kids will get it mixed up. It makes me think nobody pays attention in class. Because I'm like, were we talking about George Washington or were we talking about Ronald Reagan?
Neither of them. We're talking about the Nullification Crisis.
So, well, I'm just giving an example. See, dual credit Westword notes. Okay. And there we have it. All right, notes are posted. So, all right, so Westword Expansion. So we talked a bit about presidents, and we talked a bit about laws and stuff like that, changes to the country. But we do know that America's going to spread out. And the cool thing about that is a lot of people are going to live up to that dream of getting land. This is where Americans, as we are, get like this big cultural thing that has to do with independence at a personal level. Because you need that. Whenever you're living so far away, where it's like a half a day's walk to your closest neighbor, you better be pretty independent. If you're reliant on others too much, you're not going to make it. Somebody go out there. And it's going to take a lot of risk taking. It's so dangerous, just the travel, the risk of infection. You get hurt too bad, no one can help you. And wild animals that can eat you, the weather, crops not coming up, Indians, there's a lot of things that could kill you out there. So this is where we as Americans today, we kind of get that spirit. And sometimes it might come off as arrogance, but it's kind of like our guiding spirit. It's like, and also what feeds into that is that idea of liberty, the idea of personal individual liberty and choice and God-given rights that was outlined during the American Revolution. And so you combine all that together, and well, you got some pretty headstrong people. So Westward Expansion from sea to shining sea, 1780s to 1850s. Okay.
We are ready to go.
Transitions. All right, so a couple of vocabulary terms. You probably all remember this. Manifest destiny, from sea to shining sea.
Yes.
The idea the United States should expand to include the territory
Oregon.
from Atlantic to Pacific Ocean. Yeah, to Oregon. And so, like somebody mentioned, the Oregon Trail, right? So now, I mean, this wasn't like the type of thing people were like going to the local tavern and like going up to a table and be like, "Excuse me, sir, what do you think about manifest destiny?" This is like a term we kind of apply later. They attribute it to some kind of like poem that was in a newspaper or something. But it's just one of those things people just kept moving towards, like an unspoken inevitability, that just moving out, grabbing up land, especially after the acquisition of Louisiana Purchase. And even before that, that was a big contention with the Crown. They wouldn't let us pass the Appalachian Mountains. And of course, pioneers, someone who is the first to settle a region or enter into a project.
I'm a pioneer of
Pioneering.
Pioneering, yes.
There you go. All right. So, how is this made possible in a way that expands the states of the United States? Well, these are from the Northwest Ordinances. It's going to be like 3 all together. So, this is the process for admitting new states in the U.S. And this, of course, is going to start during the age of the Articles of Confederation. This is going to start before we even have the Constitution. And the 3 Northwest Ordinances from 1784, 1785, 1777 created a procedure for establishing territories, statehood. I think 1 or 2 of them was actually penned by Jefferson. I could be mistaken. The Confederation Congress needed to address competing claims to land west of those Appalachian Mountains I just mentioned. And so you could think of those as a mountain range that was a border west and the 13 colonies. And the land beyond those mountain range is going to be considered the West for a long time. As soon as an eligible number of voters in a territory was reached, they could elect a representative assembly, and the territory could then govern itself. After that step, the state could draft and approve a constitution. But if you remember from the U.S. Constitution, state constitutions must adhere to the rules and the guidelines of the U.S. Constitution. Joseph, you okay? Okay, good. Just making sure you're not sick. The bloodletting.
From the bloodletting.
They could then send representatives to the Confederate Congress and later the U.S. Congress. And then they could ask if they could, and we could grant it or not. Of course, they'd have to prove that they have a certain voting age population. They have to have their constitution examined, so on and so forth. So it's a process. Or it was a process. I mean, unless we start terraforming, we can't move out west and grab more states.
All right, we're going to terraform. We're going to make an entire new continent.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States of Texas.
We're going to make a massive Texas. We're just going to upscale Texas like times 10.
Okay.
Would Texas times 10 be like more than the Pacific Ocean?
What? No, Pacific's huge. Big lake.
Well, then we will put a Texas times 10 inside of the Pacific Ocean
Okay.
and ruin all of the climate
Okay.
for the entire world, and we'll go into an ice age, but it'll be fun.
Hooray! We'll have the last laugh under ice. All right. So Northwest Ordinance. Like, I think I had my did I have y'all read it, or was it my I think it was my government class. I had to read one of them because
Ordinances?
yeah, the particular thing about one of these three Northwest Ordinances is that it's going to be the first time in American legal documents where the founders are going to call on essentially like a Christian land in a sense, you know what I'm saying? But not a Christian land with a set church. So keep that in mind. And these are from the same people who will write the U.S. Constitution. So it kind of gives a good perspective into what they were thinking when they were forming America, right? All right. Woo. Those transitions. All right. The Northwest Ordinance continue. The Ordinance of 1784 established 5 new states: Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I'm not asking you to memorize this.
Wait, do we have to memorize the
Ohio, Indiana,
the
Illinois.
Northwest Ordinance process? Like,
It wouldn't hurt.
Like,
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt because it is an important thing to know because of like bleeding Kansas and stuff like that, and Missouri, the Missouri Compromise, when those areas start to become states, and it becomes a question of civil war, all right? I've spelled out the sale of land in the West. The territories were initially governed by appointees from Congress. That's right, Jefferson penned the Ordinance of 1787, which stated that the territory required 60,000 white males in order to achieve statehood. So you gotta remember, demographic-wise, most of the folks who lived within the colonies were, of course, of European descent. And as you move to the southern colonies, yes, you definitely had a sizable amount of African originals, right? And of course, not to mention the Native Americans over there too. But The ones who could vote were the white guys. Girls couldn't vote yet. So, not quite there yet. But hey, it happens. It happens over time.
See, I don't understand how men just became this. That doesn't make any sense.
I mean, that's all it is.
We're more, we're just mean.
But
Different.
you got to think about it, though. Throughout a lot of cultures, the origin of what you call manhood throughout all cultures seem to have like a common thread. And that common thread goes back to your family. And so you might be stronger, you might be more deadly, but that's to be used to defend the mother of your children and her babies. Yes, she defends the baby, you defend the mother, even if you go back to primal people. So it's each other. There's like a reason, a biological reason why you're said this way and she's said that way, and culture revolves around it. Of course, it can be abused, for sure. And abuse is pretty easy when you think about it. But we're trying to be more of an enlightened people. So, all right. Woo. Okay. So areas that the U.S. will acquire over time. Louisiana Territory, 1803. We talked about that. Parts of North Dakota and Minnesota. We'll get to that. Florida, 1819. Remember? Thanks to Andrew Jackson, right? Texas. We're going to talk about Texas in a bit. Mexican cession. That's from after the Mexican-American War. And then, and part of the peace treaty, we're like, okay, we'll give you money, you give us a lot of this desert. Yeah. Well, especially some of that land is really great land, like California, for example. Gadsden Purchase of 1853. That was essentially for slavery. That didn't really pan out. Oregon Territory. So we're going to work out with England and Gadsden Purchase. I'm going to talk about that later too. So in this period, and of course, places like Hawaii aren't coming up yet, or the territories that we're going to hold after the Spanish American War later, if you'll remember that from last semester. But it's all coming up. The big part of this, I would say, is it's good to be familiar with the order. Familiar with the order, the dates don't matter as much. So let's keep in mind, almost all of this is before the Civil War. And, some say Texas is probably going to be like the last straw that's going to lead to that avalanche into the Civil War. So you get Texas, new slaveholding territory. We have a war with Mexico over it, and what are we going to do? There's going to be a question. Well, y'all are going to make that more slaveholding territories, are you? And it's just going to be a big question for a while. So, but no, California was not slaveholding. In fact, most of the West was not involved in the Civil War. So people were seriously worried about it. And then it would be like people would really freak out when Lincoln won the election. Like, oh gosh, they thought he was going to do all kinds of crazy things. All right, so the West, reasons for going out. Many Americans view the West as an untouched land, there for the taking. So this was a common concept, even going all the way back to early explorers of North America. They were like, look at this. These Indians live here and they're letting the land go to waste. Part of the reason for that had to do with the mindset of industry. Another part had to do with hunting and gathering communities need a lot of land. If you're living off of wild plants and animals, you might be very good at it. You might know a lot about the region and all of these things. It takes a lot of area for deer and buffalo and wild game. Where if it's more efficient to get your calories from farming, you need less land to do it, and you can reap more calories from that. So they're like, oh, look at this waste. Early non-Indians in these territories extracted resources for a living. So what we're talking about here are people who were there or like getting furs and stuff like that, trappers. And so these are the people who are going to be the trailblazers into the West. These fur trappers, they're going to be friends with a lot of Native Americans. And often after making a good living selling furs, they open up trade posts in their retirement. And so they can act as kind of like a waypoint. The Indians trust them, and of course, the Americans trust them. But some of them too, they get so good at their regions, they're going to be hired out as guides in order to help people move out west and find territory. They know what to do. They can speak the language. They know where to go, where not to go, stuff like that. However, Indians have been living in these lands for countless generations. Now, of course, these tribes move, and not just because they're moving with the seasons. Some very often with Native American tribes, just like all people in the world, they migrate due to push-pull factors. Sometimes they might move to another America because they need more food in another area. Sometimes they're pushed out due to warfare with other Indians. This was very common. When furs in the markets dried up, however, like a lot of the problems with fur trapping was one, whenever it was lucrative, the Native Americans would get involved and they could overhunt and actually make some species extinct in their area because Europeans were so willing to pay so much for it. But two, it was usually related to fashion. And so like if something like beaver furs were worth a lot of money, and that was a fashion thing. But once people stopped liking it, they stopped buying it. Many of these fur trappers help establish Western settlements with their know-how and experience. So yeah, it's just one of those things. Like we're here, we know what to do. Follow me. So trailblazer, right? We're gonna do one more. I think we're gonna call it a day. So more on the reasons for going out west. Fur trapping was only one of the three main groups that first went out west. Another was not only solitary yeoman farmers. So a yeoman farmer is like this, right? You could think of it as subsistence farming, usually. That's like people who go out there and they're growing what they need, right? They're not a commercial farmer. Although they do want money, you're kind of just out there and you're just trying to make a start of it. But also you have highly organized and well-financed land speculators. If you remember, I told you like the other day that under Andrew Jackson, he wanted to sell U.S. territorial lands for just the cost of surveying it and doing the paperwork. So people would either take loans or if they had money, they would buy the land cheap and sell it later. Yeah, kind of like the stock market.
And they lost a lot of money. And the banks would go bad and they had
just like stock market investments. You try to buy low, sell high. A third group were fortune hunters out to find precious metals. The biggest move for gold was in 1848 and 1849, known as the 49ers, in the California Gold Rush. In 1848, Northern California laborers found gold flakes and then whole nuggets of gold. When news reached the East, more than 100,000 49ers came to California looking for quick riches, and the population in California boomed. They had towns grow into cities with no infrastructure. It was lawless. There was no law enforcement. Disease would spread through these places. Sometimes people would get really rich, but a lot of people wouldn't. And so the newspapers in the East were full of these stories of people finding giant gold rocks and then living in mansions the rest of their lives. And so there were stories of people who would just abandon their families or pick up their family and just go out west, usually across the continental U.S., because it took so long to catch a boat and sail all the way around South America and back up to California. And so even the journey was very dangerous. But a lot of people made it because, getting rich is hard. But we were going to pick up more on that and to be moving out west next time, and a little bit more on California, which for a very short period will actually join America during the Mexican-American War. And escape from Mexico. All right, folks. That's going to end it for our lecture today, and we'll see you again on